I'm Steve Wiggins, and this is the Groundworks Ministries podcast. Now today, we're reading from the book of 1 Corinthians, chapter 11. So let's focus on verses 27 through 32. Therefore, whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy way will be guilty of sin against the body and the blood of the Lord. So a man should examine himself in this way. He should eat the bread and drink the cup. For whoever eats and drinks without recognizing the body eats and drinks judgment upon himself. That is why many are sick and ill among you, and many have fallen asleep. If we were properly evaluating ourselves, we would not be judged. But when we are judged, we are disciplined by the Lord, that we may not be condemned by the world. Almost every time I have received communion, a pastor has mentioned today's passage to some extent. Not a lot of communion passages, so I understand this is one of the few, so it's going to be popular. They say, whoever eats or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner. Well, they always define unworthy, most often taken to mean not a believer. Therefore, the pastoral exhortation is usually accompanied with an invitation for a non-believer to surrender to Jesus as Lord before the eating and the drinking judgment upon themselves by receiving into themselves the elements of communion. And it's also always a good thing, to lead people to the Lord. And I believe communion is exclusively for believers as well. But reading today's chapter, and when you read it slowly and really consider what it's saying, I wonder if the scenario I just mentioned accurately sums up what Paul was trying to say to the church in Corinth. First off, Paul is speaking of self-serving activities among professing believers. He's not talking about unbelievers. He's talking about believers. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 18, for to begin with, I hear that when you come together as a church, there are divisions among you, and in part, I believe it. That is, I don't know that I believe everything I've heard, but I definitely believe some of what I've heard. You see, there were social cliques and there were class divisions among the body of believers inside the church. Gosh, that never happens today. Of course, it always happens. Paul was reminding the Corinthian believers of the order and then the graciousness that Jesus displayed when serving his disciples. Furthermore, Paul exhorts that those who were guilty of discrimination, he's telling them that they had abandoned the essence of communion. Hence, Paul was perhaps calling their faith into question. Are you even a believer? 1 Corinthians 11, verse 26, for as often as you eat and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. They taught us a good saying in kindergarten, you are what you eat. And when we take into ourselves the bread and the cup, we are also reaffirming our commitment to live sacrificially, even unto death. If I'm a follower of Christ, let me show you how far Christ went. He gave himself. This is his flesh. This is his blood. Laid down his life for our lives as an example so that others may enter into a saving relationship with Jesus, and then others may commune with him as we do. So I believe that to eat in an unworthy manner includes those Christians who would receive the elements all the while blaspheming them by refusing to live sacrificially, which is what we're supposed to be remembering when we receive communion. And this would invoke the judgment of God upon those believers, which leads to the disciplined correction of his children. Also, the reputation of God's holiness among his people would be preserved in the world, that those within the world in turn would believe in Jesus. This is our purpose, to know God and to make him known, and to live our lives according to God's word so that God's blessing would accompany all that we do. I'm Steve Wiggins, and this is the Groundworks Ministries podcast. Now, Groundworks Ministries operates entirely through financial donations from faithful people like you. And yes, we need your monthly support. Donating is secure and it's easy at our website, groundworksministries.com. You know, another way to help people is to tell them about Groundworks Ministries. You can share our podcast with friends and family and on your social media. And of course, you can always direct folks to our website, groundworksministries.com.